Hey guys, today's lesson is going to focus on punctuating dialogue in our personal narrative. Please turn to the notes section of your 5-subject notebook. Please go ahead and turn to a blank page and go ahead and write down punctuating dialogue at the top. Here you'll see how to spell punctuating and dialogue. Please do that correctly. Once you've done this, I'd like you to go to your independent reading book and find a spot where the author incorporated or where the author used dialogue. Please create 3 guidelines or rules for the writing and punctuating dialogue. Please make sure that you pay attention to quotation marks, capitalization, and punctuation. Once you've done this, go ahead and continue the video. So, looking over your guidelines for punctuating and writing dialogue, you may have had things like this. For example, you have to have quotation marks around what is said. You have to indent every time a new person speaks. You also have to put end punctuation inside the quotation marks. And you set off dialogue tags with punctuation. This is mostly commas, but sometimes you use question marks or exclamation marks. So what? Why is dialogue so important and why must we have it in our personal narrative? We talked earlier, a few weeks ago, about what dialogue should do and its purpose. Remember that dialogue should move your story forward, and also it should help us become familiar with the characters. Dialogue can also do a few other things for us. It can give the readers clues about what's going to happen. This is what we call foreshadowing. Remember, it lets us know what's going to happen a little bit later on in our novel. And then also, dialogue can also give us background information about the story. So, for example, a character could retell something that's happened earlier. So here are some guidelines for punctuating dialogue. Right now, I'd like you to go over the crate. You're going to see a worksheet that says guidelines for writing dialogue and punctuating it. You're going to take that sheet and tape that into your notebook. Once you've done that, continue the video, and then we're going to follow along with some of the notes. So a quotation is something that somebody has said. It is the exact words that the person has spoken. So here, you're going to notice, I need to be home at 10 o'clock, said Tom. When Tom was speaking, this is what he said, so therefore, those are in quotation marks, okay? If we look at the next one, yes, Mr. White replied, there are 3 ways to solve this problem. The only thing that Mr. White said was yes, and also there are 3 ways to solve this problem. So what you need to do here is just put quotation marks around the things that he has said. Another rule in writing, the quotation marks are used to show conversation or direct quotes. Again, that there are the speaker's exact words. So again, here's that same example. I must be home by 10 o'clock. That's exactly what he says. And here Sam yelled, I know, I can do it. A comma is used before the quotations when the speaker's name comes first. So for example, if I said, Mr. Thompson said, please return to your seats now. I know from my previous rule that the only things that are in quotations are the things that Mr. Thompson said. And then now, according to this rule, I must put a comma before the words that Mr. Thompson says. We're going to call this thing right here, we give the person's name. We're going to call this a dialogue tag. This is tagging who has said the particular dialogue. So in this case, Mr. Thompson said, we need a comma, then your quotes. Here, Travis asked, comma, would you like your turn now? So again, this is what Travis says, so this is in quotation marks. And we must separate the dialogue tag and what the person is saying, in this case, Travis, with a comma. Another rule is when a speaker's name comes last, a comma, question mark, or exclamation point is used to end the quotation. Then you use a period after the speaker's name. So, for example, here, this is what Mr. Thompson has said. Please return to your seats. Now you're going to notice that we use a comma here to separate what was said and the dialogue tag. Then at the end, because it is the end of a sentence, you're going to use a period. Again, please notice that this is a comma, and the comma comes first, then the quotation mark. Would you like your turn now? Asked Travis. Here, this is the direct quotes that Travis says, so I know that goes in quotation marks. Now you're going to notice something different. In the first example, we used a comma, but here we're using a question mark. The reason that we're using a question mark instead of a comma is because Travis is asking a question. Therefore, we need to mark that with the correct punctuation. Also, please notice the same thing. The question mark comes first, then your end quotation. Then at your end of your sentence, because this is the end of your sentence, you have to have correct punctuation, and that would be the and. All right, our next rule is when a quotation is interrupted by a speaker's name, then commas are used to separate the name from the quotation. So, for example, here, Mr. Thompson is saying to succeed, one must be willing to try. Those are the things that are going to be in quotation marks because that's directly what he says. Now we're going to notice that our dialogue tag comes right here in the middle of the dialogue. Therefore, to separate it, we must have a comma here after what was first said, and then we also have to have a comma after the dialogue tag. Please notice here the comma comes first, then the end quotation, and in here the comma comes first and then the beginning quotation mark. If only I had to study, I might have passed the test. Billy says this. If I only had studied, that must be in quotation marks. He also said I might have passed the test. That needs to be in quotation marks. Again, our dialogue tag separates the quotation marks, so therefore the comma comes after what was said, but before the ending quotation, and then this comma comes after the dialogue tag, and then this quotation marks starts the new the new dialogue. All right, another guideline for punctuating dialogue is that when we write dialogue, you often have two or more people having a conversation. Therefore, to signal to the reader that a new person is speaking, you have to have a new paragraph. If not, we could call this a character clash. So here you're going to see an example of a character clash. Kelly said, I want my band shirt back right now. You didn't have permission to borrow it. No, Paul said, but you didn't have permission to take my CD either, and I can see it on your desk. Here we have a clash of characters. We have Kelly, and we also have Paul talking, and we have all their dialogue all at once, which can make it very confusing for the reader. So this is how we correctly punctuate this. We'd start a new paragraph here because Kelly's first talking. Kelly said, I want my band shirt back right now. You didn't have permission to borrow it. Then Paul talks, so we're going to start a new paragraph. No, said Paul, you didn't have permission to take my CD either, and I can see it on your desk. Please notice the way these are punctuated. Our dialogue tag is here in the beginning, so then we have a comma followed by our quotation marks. And then we have to end the sentence with a period. Notice the period is inside the quotation mark. Here our dialogue tag is in the middle of our sentence, so we know we have to have commas on both sides. Here the comma comes after this quote, followed by the quotation marks. Then after the dialogue tag we have this comma, followed by the next quotation mark. All right, so if we were going to look here at this example, you're going to see a piece from The Outsiders. So we have to determine where the new speakers are and where our punctuation would be. So hey, where is old Dally anyway? Well, that's a new person talking, so I know that I have to have a paragraph there. He went hunting some action, dames or a fight. I hope we don't get jailed again. He just got out. I know that this is a new person speaking because they're responding to this question, and also I see that there are new quotation marks. So therefore, I'm going to put this paragraph symbol right here. He'd probably find the fight, Two-Bit stated cheerfully. That's why I came over. Mr. Timothy Shepard and Co. are looking for whoever so kindly slashed their tires, and since Mr. Shepard spotted Dallas doing it, well, does Dally have a blade? Here I know that Two-Bit is now talking, so that's going to start a new paragraph. Again, Two-Bit ends with asking a question, and here we're going to see a response, so that means a new speaker. I'm going to start my paragraph there. Not that I know of, I said. I think he got a piece of pipe, but he busted his blade this morning. All right, so hopefully that was helpful on determining when to start a new paragraph. Remember, you always start a new paragraph every time you have a new speaker. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick invitation to edit here. You're going to see some dialogue from the book called Down the Rabbit Hole. And then I'm going to show you some common mistakes that we see with dialogue and see if you can notice them on your own. So it says, "Are you a Coke person or a Pepsi person?" said cracked up Katie. Fresca was Ingrid's drink, but she said Pepsi. So let's go ahead and let's look at this first example. I'd like you to take a minute and I'd like you to see if you can determine where the error is with the punctuated dialogue. Go ahead and pause the video and start once you've found the error. Please go ahead and compare to the correct punctuation above. Did you notice here that the dialogue tag was capitalized? The dialogue tag should never be capitalized, even if you have a question mark here. The dialogue tag is always going to be lowercase. Here's another example. Can you find the common mistake here? Go ahead, please, and pause the video until you find the mistake. Did you notice that they're asking a question, are you a Coke person or a Pepsi person? Therefore, our question mark must come right after the question. It does not come after the dialogue tag. So therefore, you don't need a comma here. You need a question mark. And then at the end of your dialogue tag, you're simply going to put a period. Go ahead and look here for another common punctuation error. Pause the video and start it when you find it. All right, if we look here, you're going to notice that the period is outside of the quotation mark. Please remember that it's always your end punctuation, then your quotation mark. And here's our last example of a common dialogue mistake. Go ahead and start the video once you have found it. All right, please remember when we have our dialogue tag and what the speaker has said, we always must separate that with a comma. Please remember it's the comma first, then you're going to have your quotation mark. Okay, what I'd like for you to now do is underneath your notes that you have glued or taped into your notebook, I'd like for you to go ahead and correctly punctuate these sentences. So go ahead and write down sentence 1. Please punctuate that correctly. Then write down sentence 2. Punctuate that correctly. Then write down sentence 3 and punctuate that correctly. Please start the video again when you have completed these 3 sentences. All right, let's go ahead here and let's look at sentence 1. I'd like you to double check your work. Please notice that we have to capitalize the do here because that is the first word of a sentence. Also, our quotation marks are around do, you like roses or tulips, because that's what Joe is asking. Joe is asking a question, so therefore you're going to put a question mark there. Please also notice that the period here comes at the end of the sentence. Go ahead and correctly punctuate number 2, and then when you are done, please start the video again. All right, looking here at number 2, the correct punctuation, you're going to notice here that Mary says, "Look, there is a fox in the backyard." Therefore, both of those dialogues need to have quotation marks around them. Also, that "yelled Mary," our dialogue tag, is in the middle of the quotation of the quote. So you have to have a comma after the first part followed by the quotation mark. Then after the dialogue tag, you have a comma and then starts the next quotation mark. Then notice here that you have your ending punctuation that goes inside the punctuation mark or the quotation mark. Go ahead and correctly punctuate number 3 in your notebook and then start the video once you've done that. All right, let's compare your work. Here you're going to notice that Mrs. Bloom says, "Ask for a paper, a pencil, and a book." Therefore, that needs to be in quotation marks. Also, you need to have a comma before the dialogue tag, and then your period comes here after Mrs. Bloom. Also, please remember that we've capitalized asked, and we've also capitalized Mrs. and Bloom because those are the names. All right, let's try this again. Go ahead and correctly punctuate sentence number 4, and then pause the video and start it again once you've done that. All right, so here Travis is speaking, and he said, "Angela, did you do your homework last night?" Therefore, quotation marks go around the things that he has said. The comma is going to come after Angela and before this quotation mark because we know we have our dialogue tag in the middle. Then we have our next comma and then our quotations after that. Please remember that Travis is asking a question, so instead of a period, we are going to have a question mark. Then go ahead and write number 5 and try to correctly punctuate that. All right, so let's go ahead and see how you did on number 5. Mrs. Collins says, "You ought to be in bed." So that is going to have quotation marks around that. Then what you also need to do is you need to make sure that you have the comma after bed before that quotation mark, since our dialogue tag is here at the end of our sentence. And also you're going to have a period at the very end to denote the ending punctuation. You will then have "you" be capitalized because it's the first letter of a sentence. And then Mrs. and Colin need to be capitalized because that is her name. Go ahead and try to write sentence 6 and correctly punctuate that, please. All right, looking here, you're going to see that "pick it up and put it in the basket" was what Mrs. Gardner said. So you're going to go ahead and put those things in quotation marks. Remember that our dialogue tag is in the middle. It interrupts what she says, so we have to have that comma, then the quotation mark, then after the dialogue tag, another comma, then the quotation mark, and then we end our sentence with a period. All right, what you guys are going to do, I'm not going to have you work on this right now. Instead, you're going to come over, conference with your teacher on the 6 sentences that you just punctuated, and you're going to do some more practice before you actually go into your personal narrative and start editing that dialogue.